We'll move on to section 6, which is unfinished business, and item A is the 2013 WASB resolutions. I don't know, Mrs. Hardy, do you want to explain the whole, give us the overview of the resolution process and then introduce what we need to look at tonight?
Well, could I suggest that perhaps Mrs. Buswell do that? Because she's been the previous representative, and since I've never attended, the session where all of this business takes place, she's probably better.
Good suggestion.
Well, as you all know, the WASB, when you were at the convention this week, one of the main jobs that they do there is they have a bunch of resolutions that they have brought together. They've been solicited from the membership as a whole, from other school districts throughout the state. And a committee goes through and suggests and understands what those resolutions mean, and looks at them as a form of it. The WASB as a whole should be supporting or not supporting. So they have chosen these resolutions to bring forward, and they're looking for them. When you meet as a whole body, a delegate assembly, then each school board is given one vote, and you vote on the resolutions that you choose to support. There is, prior to the meeting the night before, there is a learning session for the delegate, and it's very informative. It's a good thing to go to. They go through the process of how they actually vote, and they do go through the resolutions. And if there's any amendments to the resolutions, those may come at that time rather than even on the floor of the assembly, so they can address some of that at that time. But each resolution's been brought forward, and we essentially as a board decide if we choose to support that resolution or not, depending on how it affects our district, essentially, and give Mr. McMillan as our delegate the approval or non-approval to vote which way we want, and then go from there. And as I said, there may be changes that are made to the resolutions. They've totally changed the verbiage where it's totally negated what the initial.
You flip your vote then,
right?
Depending on how they change it.
And so you have to use your discretion when you're going through that process and see what you feel and how it affects us. So prior years, both. I guess the administration has gone through the resolutions and kind of tried to sift through them a little more and give their perspective on how they feel it affects our district, and that has always been very helpful, I think, to the board to understand the resolutions and what it means to TOMA.
And so as you look, I did embed the resolutions and did make some notes. Mr. Gorder and I spent some time discussing them, and I don't know if there's any in particular that you have questions on. Or if you'd like us to just quickly go through each one.
Let's do that.
Okay. So the first resolution, 13-01 Educational Technology Initiative, the WSB supporting a state educational technology initiative. As Mr. Gorder and I discussed this, we agree that districts need increased technological capacity. There's no question about that, especially with the state assessments that are coming down that are going to require quick access. All students are going to be doing those assessments online. And as I mentioned earlier, we have issues with the height that goes into some of our outlying schools. Our concern is we'd like that to be defined a little bit more, because we're concerned we don't want them to tell us this is what you've got to do. We need them to give us help to get what we need. And that's where, we're not sure if we support that or not. It depends on whether or not they're saying your school district has to obtain this type of system. And if that's going to cost us a lot more money without any additional assistance, then we're a little weary about that.
And I will say what will happen is usually the sponsoring district will get up and state their initiative and why they did that, or why they are supporting this and why they're bringing it forward. And then you do get a lot of discussion. So some of this may be cleared up at that point too.
But I agree, this one just seems sort of vague. I didn't know what it would accomplish, and some of these aren't even sponsored by a school district, they can be brought sua sponte from the WASB, right? And I'm not sure if this was or not. I guess we have the other ones attached to it, but I don't know if anyone else has any comments. I really didn't see what specifically it proposed to do. So I guess until we hear something, some explanation at the assembly, it'd be tough to take much of a position on it unless someone else has any strong thoughts on it.
No, it reminded me too of kind of of how the initiative to have the entire state come into one sort of adaptive focus for student information. And I was afraid that we would get down the same line and have to be forced into something that we don't need or want.
Okay. All right.
There's a number of resolutions that deal with funding, finance formula, and so when you look at like 1302, 1303, 1305, I think 1308, Mr. Gorder and I talked about how those really depend on how they're going to fund those things. If they're looking at the elimination or less, just maintaining the current pot of state aid, then you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, there are districts that are going to be winners, there are districts that are going to be losers, and people are going to take a stand on these as to whether or not they personally benefit. So I think, you know, we're cautious about any changes that would potentially harm our funding. And I think that the bigger issue is the whole system. You know, should there be a change in how we fund public education so that it's more fair? Because certainly, you know, we understand, you know, wanting additional funds when you have a high number of students that aren't achieving as high, because you're going to need additional resources to assist those students. But if we're not achieving at a low enough level, then funds could be pulled from our district to help students who aren't doing as well somewhere else, and yet we need that money. So there's a number of resolutions in regard to that, Mr. McMullen, that we're not convinced we necessarily support.
Because ultimately it's going to affect the amount of state aid if they're taking it from that one pool, which will ultimately have the effect of lowering the amount of state aid that's available to Toma.
But on many of those, you wrote okay if it's not tied to state aid.
Yeah.
To the existing dollars in the system.
Right.
If they're new dollars,
Yeah.
I'm interested in talking about it, but even at that, you know, we lost quite a few dollars. We were getting aided close to 70 cents on the dollar, and I believe this past year we're down to just under 60 cents on the dollar. So we would like to go back to where we were.
Okay. I don't know if on any of those concerning funding, if anyone had any particular thoughts. I guess it's worth mentioning, perhaps again, these do not become law. They are resolutions that the WASB lobbies on behalf. And so just because we support them or not, even if they pass, it doesn't mean anything really changes, right?
If you look at Resolution 1304, Student Academic and Career Plans, when you read through that, it talks about WSB supporting the recommendation of all students having an academic and career plan beginning in the middle school grades. And then it talks about that there be sufficient flexibility to the school district to ensure that student and school needs are met. So, you know, we certainly support that. I think it's very helpful if every student would have a academic and career plan. We're just not sure what they mean by sufficient flexibility. So what, you know, I guess we'd, again, like some additional information there. Are they saying you can do whatever you want, and then is that really effective? And yet, if this is going to be an unfunded mandate where we have to develop these plans for every child without any assistance or help, that can add some real additional work to our counselors and our teachers, despite the fact that it's very valuable. So, I guess.
And these academic and career plans, as you understand them, what would they amount to? How do you envision those?
Well, currently, our 8th grade and high school counselors do meet, I shouldn't say 8th grade, our middle school counselors meet with students as they're in 8th grade to develop kind of a career and a high school plan. And they have piloted doing that with certainly not all of the student population, but they've increased their numbers every year. I think they started out with 50 students that they were doing that with. So, I mean, it literally is talking with the student and their parents about what the child's interests are, the types of classes that would help that child be able to utilize those interests in a career area. And I think that is very beneficial. The difficult thing has been getting parents involved. You know, we can pull students out of a class and sit down with them, but the true impact of a plan of this nature would be, again, that everybody's on board, parents, school, and student, and everybody's working together. So when you are missing that leg of the stool, that the parent piece, because many parents don't have the time to come in or just don't wish to, that does have an impact on the effectiveness of those developed plans. But when you can get parents in and the child and a counselor talking about the future and the courses that are appropriate, the interests of the child, the career opportunities that are there, it's very valuable.
Okay.
Let's see, 1305 is the ACT suite. I do know that Tony Evers has asked for that to be funded with his school funding plan, but again, you know, there is concern that if we're required to give the ACT to every student, as well as the Plan and Explore, the Plan and Explore, that's going to cost money. And, you know, where does that money come from? So if it's funded, you know, we certainly are in favor of that, although I know we've had discussions about, is the ACT the best test for every child? If a student really sees themselves as joining the military, the ASVAB is an effective test. The COMPASS test is used by our technical schools. So there is some disagreement about what test should be given. But if it is going to be required of every student, I guess we would expect the state to pony up the funds for that.
Okay.
You can feel free to add in at any time, too. Scholarship tax credits, I think the last line of that description probably explains that best. The concern is that, again, corporations would be able to use the tax credits, and that would end up pulling money out of state aid. So what you would be doing is funding scholarships to private schools because of the tax credits that the corporations would get from having their scholarships. So WASB is opposed to that, and we would agree because that is a problem.
Okay.
Parent trigger laws, Resolution 13-7. You folks are elected by the community and by parents. So if people aren't happy with the work of the school board, they have an opportunity to elect new individuals. So we agree that we don't believe in parent trigger laws that would allow that petition process to lessen your control and oversight of the school district. $13.8, the supplemental aid to districts with significant tax-exempt land. We already do receive impact aid that's designed to do that. So again, we're concerned about if this is additional money, fine, but if it's coming out of a pot that already exists, that's probably not a good idea.
And while we're on that, I mean, because in our district we have a lot of federally owned land, I mean, would we potentially benefit from something like that? You're saying we already are aided
We
through
receive
impact.
federal aid for tax-exempt lands in the form of impact aid, which is basically an offset to the students that are living on federal lands each year. So that comes and goes as the amount of people within the district that live on those federal lands. Again, you know, and I guess it really doesn't matter for us whether sometimes we lose or win. It's the concept of I mean, if you look at overall in this whole proposal, what are there, 3 or 4 different special interests at work here to get more money for their school district at the expense of other districts. And I think by and large, you know, as Cindy and I have talked, and I think as past boards have talked, we're not interested in diluting the state aid that is given to the state in general, and then to dilute that even further by having that money go to special interests. That's why we've taken care of what we need to take care of within our means, and I guess it's a little frustrating to keep continuing seeing our dollars end up going somewhere else in some form or fashion. So I think that's our rationale on this one. Could it mean potentially additional dollars for the district? Possibly, but we would rather see all those additional dollars for all districts stay where they're at. So I think by and large, if you look through this, we would end up losing more dollars than what we would gain.
13.9, technical education and work-based learning opportunities. The next one on transcripted credit, dual enrollment. Those all have to do with increasing our students' ability to start getting post-secondary credit while they're in high school and making their senior year a lot more valuable. And obviously, we are very much in favor of all of those things. The modified school calendar models, again, we have our flexible learning year committee that's working, so we definitely support removing the barriers that exist to modified school year calendars, so that there's more flexibility in our school calendar. Open enrollment applications during the window period only. You know, we certainly support that. You know, having open enrollment exceptions every month, or, you know, how often we see them. I have to believe that it's in the best interest of students, for the most part, once they start in a school, to finish that school year out. We see more children that are, I'm going to try this for a while, now I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try this. And being able to jump from school to school from different type of programming, I'm not sure that's in a child's best interest. So having people apply during the open enrollment time, committing to going to school in that location for a year, we support.
Well,
I think
yeah. Go ahead.
Also concerning too is the fact that our third Friday count in September is a pretty important date. Those enrollments are for resident students that live in the district, and that's what we get counted by, whether they're going to another district or to open enrolling into another. We still get to count them, but then we have to make payments to another district if they do leave. And if that student is not is open enrolling into a let's say a virtual school, it becomes problematic for us that we're not always able to count them. We want to be able to count those students, and having them be somewhere for 3 or 4 days and then coming back to our school district, which happens enough, is problematic. So we're losing some of the revenue limit dollars on that. So, it'd be nice to see them kind of deal with that issue a little bit, and whether it's closing the window down sooner or by shifting those revenue dollars, that would be very nice.
We have a situation that just was brought to our attention this last month with a student who had open enrolled at a virtual school, had stopped going in October. We were notified December 20th that the child was no longer going to school at this virtual school. So I called and said, did you file truancy on this child, since they haven't been, because the other thing that happened is the student then, they had told her she needed to leave because she wasn't doing her work. Then she reapplied for second semester to go back there. And so I called and said, did you file truancy? Because she hasn't been in school since October, according to her latest application. And they said, well, no, we really didn't close her off the books until December 20th. And I'm like, well, there's 3 months there, October, November, December, where she was not in school and nothing was being done. And kids fall through the cracks that way. We were able to get her enrolled. I called the student, and we were enrolling her in the Milwaukee Street Academy because she is an 18-year-old student, and she's a bright girl. She certainly will be able to be successful there, but she was jumping around from one program to another and really losing out on a whole semester of schooling. And yet we're going to be accountable to pay this virtual school for every day through December 20th. Well, December 10th is when they withdrew her, but they didn't notify us until the 20th.
I guess I'd like to think that's one of those extremes or worst case scenarios, and I understand the challenges that having a wide open enrollment presents financially and administratively, but I guess looked at as something that's supposed to be there for the benefit of the students, I do have some problem with the principle that we're making a student stay somewhere where we're not being able to serve that student's needs.
We make a lot of assumptions in that statement, and we do the same thing. But the assumption is that move is in the child's best interest. That's not always the case. Probably, I could put percentages, and that wouldn't be appropriate. But there's a lot of reasons why people choose to open enroll their child to another district or to a virtual school or to even homeschool them or whatever it is, in simply just to avoid the compulsory attendance rules and laws. There's quite a bit that happens.
Well, anecdotally, I'm sure you can present cases like that, but I'm sure anecdotally people have reasons to move students, and those reasons don't just conveniently happen during convenient windows that are convenient for our administrative rules. And so I guess I am a little bit troubled that we would take a position against something that, at least in principle, is supposed to be for the benefit of the students, as far as I see it.
I think, Mr. McMullen, if there were a provision in state law that if the parents in the school district agree that there needs to be, you need to look at some other alternative, and then you work with another school district, but to just automatically have it be part of open enrollment, that at any time parents can say, oh, I don't want to be in Toma anymore, let's try this school district. And then when they're not happy there, oh, let's try this school district. We've been told by DPI pretty much that, and I don't disagree that parents know their children best. And so DPI has really said that when parents say they're doing this because they believe it's the best interest of their child, you should respect that. I do. But I think there should be dialogue. I think there should be some ability to control that to some degree. And right now that, we're being told pretty much if the parent says they believe it's in the child's best interest, then you've got to let it go. And there certainly have been cases that we've approved, and there's one tonight that I'm recommending that you approve, that I do believe it's probably in a child's best interest to try something else. So having that opportunity is important. I don't disagree with you, but I don't know that it has to be that we're keeping open enrollment year-round.
Would it be beneficial if they could add some sort of language to that effect? This looks like you're saying, this one is the narrowest window versus all year round, and I can see both sides that it's not perfect, but I don't know if there would be any, you can see in the discussion if there's, if they're talking about any sort of, I think you said it well, Mrs. Sardi, with the, consensus of both school districts that this is a win for the child, that something's best interest of the child is really affecting them, and they need to make a transition out. They've tried all the options in that school district, they need to try a different district.
And we have other concerns too. It's not just that the child it isn't just about the student leaving Toma. If they can go wherever they want, I don't think that's really our concern. It's where are they actually ending up, and what are they actually getting out of the dollars that are getting funded to these different school districts, because that's really what it's about, is the ability to provide a quality education. Now, you're right, sometimes we can't make those judgments on the quality of education, but I think it would be worth our time as a board at some point in time to sit down and maybe to look at this further, because I think there is more to this than just a simple yes or no, you can't go. I think on our side of it, maybe we're looking like we're trying to control too many things, but on the flip side of that is there really needs to be some dialogue on what's going on and where these kids are going and what's happening here. To see this money, the $6,000 go to a virtual school and have the kid drop out after a month is really disheartening when we don't get any of that money back.
Absolutely.
And what are they doing? We know what we're doing to try to help the students. I know our job isn't to set up a advertising campaign here to get students to come here and stay here. We've talked about that. I don't think the taxpayers give us money to do those things, and there certainly is this is a business. It's a big business. This isn't the private sector doing this because it's in the best interest of kids. This is about making money, and our concern really is what the education those kids are walking away with. So the example that Mrs. Artie, they got paid about $6,500. The student dropped out of school. They're going to come back to Toma. What did we get? And there's more cases. I'm not going to say more cases than not, but there's a significant number of cases that happen that makes us concerned about it. Not to say that we're right or wrong, but it's worth further discussion, because I get what you're saying. It kind of sounds like we're against anybody. We're trying to hoard our kids, and that's not what it's about. It's being responsible, in helping those kids.
And I appreciate that, and I do understand the difficulties with it. I do think it's worthy of some discussion, just because I don't like standing on the principle that we're saying, sorry, if you're here, it doesn't matter if we can't provide you with what you need, you missed the deadline, you're stuck. And as I understand it, under the current system, when it's in the best interest of the student, we do have the authority to say no. We're not exercising that authority.
We have the authority to say no. DPI has said if it's appealed to them, they will side with the parent. So, yeah.
So it becomes a question of time and energy. Right or wrong, that's what it is. How much time and energy are you going to go to the DPI on an appeal when there are many other things that we're working on in the district. And if that's what the DPI thinks, then why even have an appeal process?
Okay.
So it's not a perfect system, we're just saying we need some work here.
But you're asking, you would prefer to go back to the system that as it existed before the Act 10 changes,
Yes.
where there was a very defined open enrollment period, and if you missed it, no exceptions. You remain in our district.
See, I'm not willing to go quite that far, because there are the exceptions that deal with, military. There are exceptions that deal with bullying. And I see value in those. My concern are those students that have found themselves possibly truant, possibly having some discipline problems, and it's easier for the parents to say, we're going somewhere else, and not address the real issue that exists and work with us to solve that issue.
Yeah, I guess it would be helpful for me to know how often the system is subject to being abused. I mean, you've given me the anecdotes of abuse. I guess I haven't seen the anecdotes of people saying, our child was saved because we were able to get them into this other program, and they
I don't
did
know
very
that
well.
we can give you that, because many times we don't hear those. You know what I mean? We know.
I would guess over 2/3 of the instances of open enrollment are in the best interest in the child. I would go on a limb and say 1/3 of those would be worth some further research into that, if it's truly maybe other reasons, whether it's issues in the school district, or if it's a compulsory attendance, and that's anecdotal too there, but that's my guess, looking at what I've seen over the years and the problems that we see.
And because funding is an issue, maybe that's where the rubber meets the road too, where if there is an open enrollment exception, that there can be some adjustment made if the child drops out or isn't successful, where the district isn't out that money when the other, the virtual school or whatever hasn't done what they should have done. I don't know.
All right, I stand alone. We'll move on. I appreciate that feedback, though. I just wanted to get a sense of the boundaries on that. And some of these, as Mrs. Buswell pointed out, until you get in there and you hear the discussion, you don't quite know what the boundaries are going to be.
The shortage of speech-language pathologists, this was a proposal that we had sent in. They made some significant modifications to it, but I think we definitely want to support this. I think there should be alternative pathways. We have numerous students who graduate with a communicative disorders degree. What can they do with that degree? Develop a educational pathway for those kids who don't get into the graduate school, so that they can put what they've learned in college to work in our school setting. I think there needs to be some real discussion on that, and I would encourage Mr. McMullen, you to vote in favor of that.
I do support that.
The gun-free schools law just expands that to kindergarten 4K places. That was not included actually in the definition of a gun-free school zone. So we would support that.
I'm going to make the assumption that this has been on there prior to the events at Sandy Hook.
Yes. And then costs associated with open record requests, obviously we would support that we can charge requesters for the costs involved in complying with an open records request. The green sheets then are the ones, these were resolutions that were not, well, I shouldn't say they weren't, some of them were modified and actually included as resolutions, others were rejected, but they have the potential to come forward nonetheless. So there are some notes on those. I don't know, Mrs. Buswell, what, if you found that that typically happens,
In
or?
the 2 years I went, I don't think there were any brought forward that hadn't already been listed.
They need like a 2/3
Yes.
support or some
Right.
fairly
That's what you
demanding burden they have to clear to get those back on.
Yeah, they do.
The 1 year I did it, they did try to bring one of these other ones up, but it didn't get the support.
Okay.
But it was presented again.
Okay.
And I would say, too, that after the training session that evening, the group does meet again and goes back through they go through their rationale and they go through each of the resolutions. And anyone can go to that. So, they kind of go delve a little deeper into them then. And if we do choose to do that, you can also go later for that. Because the initial meeting's only half an hour, 45 minutes or so.
Okay. I'll go to that. Thank you.
I know that when Mr. Gorder and I talked to the Wanakee Resolution Equalization Value Reporting Date, we really do think WSB should be supporting and promoting that, so that business managers and school districts can have a better sense of budgeting prior to a quarter of the school year being done. So, I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, Mr. Gorder.
I just, the committee did not advance this resolution. It was determined there was insufficient information at this time regarding the potential costs and administrative ramifications of this proposal on the Department of Public Instruction. And I guess I'm kind of almost flabbergasted that they would even use that language when they have 3 other pages of the same thing on here. And all we're asking for is an aid estimate to make decisions, financial decisions for the district. So as you can see, a little frustrated with that. So I would hope you would support that. If not, listen to the discussion carefully.
Although it was not forwarded, so
Right.
it won't be discussed unless,
You could
Somebody
propose
brings it up.
it if you would like.
And you may be surprised at the support you could have.
Yeah.
okay?
Are there any others, Mr. McMullen, that you would like any feedback on or more information?
No, I don't think so. On the green sheets at least, many of those were forwarded and modified, and if they weren't, then I'll just have to wait and see if anybody wants to go to the trouble to try to actually get them back on. But the notes that you provided, I agreed with those. Anyone else have any other comments or thoughts on any of the resolutions?
Don't be afraid to get up and say something.
Okay.
Yeah, just
All right.
get right up there to that mic and...
Well, I was practicing with Mrs.
Right,
Zardi,
right.
so...
You did very well. You held your own there, so I think you would do very well at the assembly.
See if I had enough courage there. Okay, well, thank you for going through those. And I did look at the agenda, and as Mrs. Buswell pointed out, they have a couple of things before the actual assembly where they go through that, and an introduction for people that are doing it the first time, so I'll go to those. Thanks.